Hello, everyone. Hey there, my name's John, and I've got a little story to share. It's about why I'm sitting here in my kitchen at 2:30 p.m. on a weekday when, under normal circumstances, I'd be at work. Honestly, I feel like I need to explain the 4 phone calls I've made and the single text I sent while sitting here. Let's see. I've been here for about 2 hours now, an hour and 45 minutes of stewing and 15 minutes of action that might have just shattered who knows how many lives. Hold on a second. Someone's at the door. Oh, hey, sweetheart. Where's Sandra? I asked as my daughter walked in. Travis got off work early. He's picking her up from kindergarten and will watch her until I get back, she replied. Laura, I've said this before, but I'll say it again. He's a great guy. I know dads are supposed to grumble about their sons-in-law, but you really chose well. I can't help but like him. I chuckled, noticing her grim smile. We always did share the same dark sense of humor. Have you told Arthur yet? She asked. No. Your brother's at sea right now. I'll send him an email later, I said. Okay, Dad. Just know I'm here for you, all right? Yeah, thanks, sweetie. We fell into a heavy silence for a moment. Then she asked, Why would she do this to you, Dad? I don't know, honey, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. Why didn't she just tell you? She pressed. Well, I haven't actually spoken to her yet, I admitted. You mean she's still? Laura glanced uneasily toward the staircase leading up to the master bedroom. Yep, I said. I just wanted to wait so she could explain herself to all of us at once, I added. All of us? She echoed, her eyes narrowing. I invited a few more people. They should be here shortly. Her expression grew more serious. What are you going to do? No more or less than I need to in order to survive this, I replied. So, you already have a plan? She asked. Yeah, I said. Doesn't it depend on her explanation? She asked again. It doesn't matter what her reason is. The facts are what they are, I said firmly. But what if she was being blackmailed? Laura suggested. If you'd seen and heard what I did, you'd know that wasn't the case, I replied. She stared at me for a moment, her troubled eyes searching mine. I thought you were handling this well, but now I can see you're not, are you? No, I admitted quietly, turning away so she wouldn't see the tears threatening to fall. What can I do to help, Dad? She asked softly. Do whatever your conscience tells you to. I'll respect whatever you decide, I said. Thanks, Dad. Do you have any idea why she'd do this? None. I thought we had a good marriage, up until this morning. Her brow furrowed. What happened this morning? I sighed. Well, your mom has always been terrible at lying and keeping secrets. It's just not in her nature. After 27 years together, I know her habits like the back of my hand. She showers every morning. On Tuesdays and Fridays, she washes her hair and spends a little more than an hour getting ready. On other days, she's in and out of the bathroom in about 30 minutes. This morning, though, she was in there for an hour and a half. What did she say? Laura asked. I went in to remind her she'd be late for work, and I noticed the underwear she had on and the outfit she was laying out. They weren't her usual office clothes. I asked her what she was up to, and she just said, nothing out of the ordinary, just work. But I could tell she was lying. What made you so sure? Well, on any other day, if she thought she'd be late for work, she'd be frazzled. This morning, she was calm, almost too calm. That's when I realized she had no intention of going to work. So, what did you do? She asked. I called in sick and parked a little way up the street. My plan was to follow her when she left the house, but she never went anywhere. Around 11:30, that guy from her real estate office showed up. I crept back inside to confirm what I already suspected. After that, I made a few calls. And now, here we are. Were there any signs before today? Anything that could have clued you in? She asked. Not a thing, sweetie. As far as I knew, we were solid. I loved her, and I thought she loved me too. The plan was to work a few more years, then retire and enjoy the rest of our lives together. Dad, I have to ask. Laura began, but I stopped her short. Don't even go there, Laura. No, I've never cheated on your mother. Not once in my life have I disrespected a woman like that. Even when our love life fizzled out a couple of years ago, I dealt with it. You mean you and Mom haven't been intimate for 2 years? She asked, surprised. That's right. Your mom's never been especially passionate in that sense. Early on, she seemed to enjoy it, but even then, initiating was always a struggle. And once menopause hit 2 years back, whatever we had just stopped. So, finding out today must have been a real gut punch, she said gently. I didn't reply, but the look on my face must have spoken volumes. Just then, there was a soft knock at the door. I opened it to find my father-in-law standing there. Come on in, Hector, I said, stepping aside. Thanks, John. Where is she? He asked, his voice low. Upstairs, in our bedroom, I said. I need to see for myself, he said firmly. I understand. Go ahead, sir. Just don't disturb her, please. He nodded grimly and headed upstairs. When he came back down, he looked like he'd aged 10 years in the span of a minute. Slumping into a chair, he accepted the whiskey I poured him and downed it in one go. I can't believe she'd do this to you, he muttered. She knows how crushed you were when your fiancé cheated on you. She helped you pick up the pieces back then, and she knows how devastated I was when I caught her mother and she ran off with that man, abandoning me and the kids. He shook his head, his voice breaking. I'm sorry, John. I need to get out of here. I guess a woman shouldn't see her granddad cry either. I walked him to the door, motioning for Laura to stay back. The man deserved to leave with whatever pride he had left. Standing on the porch, he gripped my shoulders for support. Do what you have to do, son. But please, nothing physical. I couldn't bear that, he pleaded. Don't worry, Dad. I won't harm a single hair on your daughter's head, I promised. But I can't say the same for everything else. I'm sorry for what I'm about to do. He stared at me for a long moment, then gave a solemn nod and shuffled to his car. As he drove off, a broken man, I quickly called his son, my wife's brother, and urged him to check on their dad. I kept the details vague, but made it clear the old man needed support. As I hung up, I heard the upstairs toilet flush. Her nap must have been over. Sitting back down with Laura, we waited in silence until the sounds of creaking bed springs and muffled passion drifted down the stairs. See, Laura, does that sound like blackmail to you? I asked quietly. No, Dad, it doesn't. How can you just sit here? Why don't you go up there and deal with that guy? She demanded. It's not easy, sweetie, I admitted. But I have this way of shutting off my emotions, of distancing myself from the feelings. Oh, so that's where I get it from, she said with a wry smile. But why put yourself through this? Why not just throw her out right now? I'm waiting for one more guest, I said. Right on cue, there was another knock at the door. Opening it, I found a woman standing there, looking composed but serious. She was a few years younger than me, and she had two teenagers, a boy and a girl, standing slightly behind her. Mr. Brown, she asked. Yes. Please call me John, I replied. I'm Jenny Smith, and these are my kids, Aaron and Susan. I brought them along because, if what you've told me is true, I want them to understand that it was their father who destroyed our family. She offered her hand, and I shook it firmly. Her son's handshake surprised me with its strength. I introduced them to Laura, and then Jenny got straight to the point. You said you had proof, John, she prompted. I walked over to a pair of pants draped over the couch and pulled a wallet from the pocket. Handing it to her, I watched as she opened it and examined the driver's license. A single tear rolled down her cheek. It was clear she'd been clinging to some hope that I was mistaken. Her expression hardened. Well, John, where are they? She asked. In response, I held a finger to my lips, silently gesturing for her to listen. From upstairs, the sounds of grunts and groans confirmed everything. Son of a, you haven't confronted them yet? She asked incredulously. No, I wanted us to do it together, as a united front. I've also got video evidence and audio recordings from a device I slipped under the bed, I explained. We can go up now, but I suggest the kids stay back until things are presentable. You're right, she said, taking a steadying breath. Just give me a moment. She made a quick call to a locksmith, instructing him to change the locks on her house. Then she rang her lawyer to confirm next steps. Jenny turned to us, shoulders squared and voice firm. All right, let's do this, she said. Laura and I headed upstairs, leaving Jenny's kids at the bottom of the staircase with instructions to wait for our signal. Jenny peeked cautiously through the doorway before nodding at me to proceed. I motioned for her and Laura to stay back while I stepped into the room. Standing at the foot of the bed, I took in the scene with a mix of disgust and detachment. They were too engrossed in their performance to notice me at first. The sounds she was making, sounds she'd never made for me, were both infuriating and pathetic. She used to call those noises demeaning, refusing to make them since shortly after our wedding. As the man collapsed beside her, she let out a satisfied cry before they resumed, completely unaware of their audience. When she turned over, her eyes locked on mine. Her face instantly fell, and she let out a shriek. Her lover followed her gaze, quickly spotting me. He scrambled to get up, looking utterly ridiculous and exposed. Once on his feet, he froze, staring at my face as if trying to gauge how much trouble he was in. The man had good instincts. It was clear he could tell I wasn't in the mood to let this slide. "That's right, pal. I'm bigger, uglier, and angrier than you. Now, why don't you get back in that bed and cover up yourself and my soon-to-be ex-wife?" I said, my voice cold. Without hesitation, he obeyed, retreating to the bed and pulling the covers over both of them. Karen's expression shifted from shock to defiance. I decided to let her speak first. "John, I want a divorce," she began, her voice trembling slightly. "I've fallen in love with Joe here. I'm sorry you had to find out this way. We were planning to tell you tomorrow." "It's fine, dear. You've got it," I replied, my tone dripping with sarcasm. "By the way, I would have figured out his name was John Smith soon enough. Your lover left his wallet in his pants downstairs." Her eyes widened slightly. "Karen, just out of curiosity, why did you end our marriage like this? You had to know catching you cheating would destroy me." Shame flickered across her face, but only briefly. "I'm sorry, John. We couldn't help falling in love," she said weakly. "I get that. Falling in love is one thing. But couldn't you have waited until we were divorced before sleeping with this guy? That part was in your control, wasn't it?" I wanted to make sure John and I were compatible," she stammered. This was the first time." "Oh, I see. A test drive, huh?" I snapped, my voice rising. "Try before you buy? That sort of thing?" "Don't be crude, John," she said, flinching. "I don't want to end things fighting. Can't we part as friends?" "Friends?" I repeated, incredulous. "You're lying in my bed with another man, and you think we can just shake hands and part amicably? I don't think so." She dropped her gaze, unable to meet my eyes. The room fell silent for a long moment. "Well, since you don't have much to say, let me tell you something your dad asked me to pass along. He's disappointed in you. He had hoped you wouldn't turn out like your mother," I said. Karen's face turned ghostly pale. "He was here," she whispered. "He sure was. He stood in this very spot about half an hour ago." "Why?" "Because I wanted you to start feeling just a sliver of the pain I've been carrying since this guy showed up." Her voice cracked. "Please, John, don't tell the kids." "Too late," I replied, just as Laura stepped into the doorway. Karen squealed, pulling the sheets over her head like a child trying to hide. "Don't bother, Mom. That trick doesn't work for ostriches, and it won't work for you either," Laura said coldly. Karen stayed buried under the covers, sobbing softly. Her lover shifted uncomfortably, looking like he wanted to be anywhere else. "When Dad called me, I gave you the benefit of the doubt," Laura said, her voice shaking. "I couldn't believe you'd do this to him, but seeing it with my own eyes, I understand now. There's no coming back from this." Karen didn't respond. Only her muffled sobs filled the room. "Well, since you have nothing to say, let me make something clear. You won't be babysitting your granddaughter this weekend. In fact, if keeping her away from you means sparing her your poisonous influence, then you can consider yourself permanently cut off from her life." "No," came Karen's broken reply from beneath the sheets. Laura, now in tears, turned and bolted for the door. I caught her, pulling her into a hug, but she wriggled free and ran downstairs. Moments later, the sound of the front door slamming echoed through the house. Karen re-emerged from the covers a few minutes later, her eyes bloodshot and filled with anger. "Why did you have to do that, John?" she demanded. "Because you haven't begun to feel the pain you've caused me, Karen. You haven't felt like your heart's been ripped out and stomped on, but you will. I promise you that." Her expression hardened, and defiance crept back into her voice. "If anyone's leaving this house, it's going to be you," she declared. "I used the power of attorney you gave me to transfer the deeds into my name. The house is mine." Her words hit like a slap, but I recovered quickly. "And how are you planning to afford the mortgage, Karen?" I asked coldly. She hesitated before replying, "With my salary and commissions. Plus, John and I have a plan." "What salary is that?" I asked, waiting for the truth to catch up with her. "Karen," I began, "your boss, Mr. Johnson, asked me to pass along a message. You're both fired. He wanted to tell you himself, but apparently, your phones are off. As a devout Christian, he doesn't take kindly to two married employees cheating on company time." Her face turned pale. You didn't, John. Tell me you didn't," she said weakly. "Oh, I absolutely did. I sent him some lovely pictures too," I replied flatly. Karen's bedmate finally found his voice. "How do you even know I'm married?" he asked. I smirked. "Driver's license, buddy." From there, it was easy. Phone book, quick call, and voila. "Your wife, Jenny, about 5'6", gorgeous red hair. Your kids, Aaron and Susan, seem like good kids too. Were you planning on betraying them as well, or is that just Karen's style?" "Please, Mr. Brown, don't tell my wife," he pleaded desperately. "And why shouldn't I? Haven't you already emptied your bank accounts in preparation for sailing off into the sunset with Karen? She was going to get my house, right?" I said, my voice icy. "Just give me a chance to tell her myself," he begged. "She doesn't deserve to find out like this. I still love her, in my own way. Doesn't deserve to find out like this?" I shot back. "You mean the way I did? You're right. Unfortunately for you, it's already too late." I didn't need to turn around to know exactly when Jenny and her children entered the room. His face said it all. The shock and horror on his expression were almost satisfying. "It's way too late, darling husband," Jenny said, her voice calm but dripping with venom. "I'll forever be grateful to Mr. Brown here for bringing this to my attention. And just so you know, the video evidence he's provided is more than enough to trigger the post-nup you signed the last time I forgave you." Karen's head whipped around to look at her lover, her face a mixture of disbelief and panic. I watched dispassionately, wondering what hit harder: the revelation that he was a repeat offender or the realization that their financial plans were falling apart. Jenny straightened her shoulders, her tone resolute. "The locks on my house should be changed by now. If you want to collect your things, they'll be in the dumpster I'm hiring this afternoon." Throughout her tirade, John, Karen's partner in betrayal, stared at the floor, looking like a condemned man. I found out later that he'd seduced Karen first, but the so-called test drive had been her idea. His grand plan was to tell his family the next day, but he never anticipated the fallout being so swift and brutal. He glanced briefly at his wife and kids, but shame made him look away. Jenny's composure began to crack, but she rallied for a final blow. "Well, kids, if you've ever wondered what a cheating woman looks like, take a good look." Karen visibly cringed under the combined weight of their stares. Jenny gathered her children and stormed out, leaving an echoing silence behind her. I turned to the two of them, seething with rage. "Get out of my house. You have no idea the fury I'm feeling right now. I'll be gone for 2 hours, but when I come back, I expect you both to be gone. Don't even think about trying to rip me off, Karen. If you do, your chances of living happily ever after, no, make that living, period, will drop to 0. Understand?" One look at my face was all it took to convince them I wasn't bluffing. They nodded meekly. I ran after Jenny, catching her just before she drove off. We agreed to meet at a nearby coffee shop. There, we consoled each other and tried to guide the kids through the emotional wreckage. Aaron, surprisingly mature for his age, comforted his sobbing sister, which only deepened the pang in my heart. I couldn't help but wish their father had been there to see what he'd done to his daughter. Before parting, I handed Jenny my card. "If you need help with anything, don't hesitate to call," I said. We parted on what I hoped were amicable terms. The next week was grueling. I might have the ability to shut off my emotions in a crisis, But that doesn't mean the pain disappears. It just gets postponed. Work and meetings with lawyers kept me busy, and the evidence I'd gathered, especially the voice recordings, proved invaluable. The recordings captured detailed conversations where Karen and her lover plotted to drain the marital assets from both households. Her justification? She felt entitled because of my earning capacity. The lawyers assured me that this premeditated scheming would likely sway the judge to rule more favorably for me. Laura, who insisted on hearing the recordings herself, was stunned. Her mother's cold, calculated actions shook her to the core. She called Karen, demanding an explanation, but the responses were weak and unconvincing. It was heartbreaking to see Laura grapple with the truth of her mother's vindictiveness. The weekend brought an unexpected call from Jenny. "John, I know how to mow a lawn, but I can't figure out how this mower works. Could you show me?" I agreed, and after teaching her the basics and handling a few maintenance tasks, I stayed for dinner. As the evening wore on and the kids went to bed, the conversation grew more serious. "How are you holding up, Jenny?" I asked gently. "About as well as can be expected," she said. "Thanks for asking. I think I've been mentally preparing for this for years. Deep down, I always knew it would happen again. My lawyers blocked all his financial schemes. I couldn't believe he planned to leave us almost penniless. With your evidence and the postnup, I'll get the house, child support, alimony, and most of the assets." "Happy to help, Jen. My lawyers are saying something similar, though I'll likely end up with 50 to 70% of the assets," I replied. "He came by a couple of days ago, begging me to reconsider. I told him to get lost." She sighed. "I'm worried about the kids. Susan will be fine, but Rob, at his age, he needs a strong male role model." I paused, then said, "Well, if you're looking for one, can I volunteer?" "I'd be honored to help Rob in any way I can," I said earnestly. Jenny didn't reply immediately, and I could see the conflict playing out on her face. Finally, she spoke. "John, I know your ego might be feeling pretty fragile right now, so I'm not sure how to," she trailed off, clearly struggling to find the right words. "Don't worry about it, Jen," I reassured her. "Right now, all I'm offering is support for Rob, nothing more." Relief washed over her face, and we spent a while discussing the details of how I could help. Then she shifted the conversation. "How about you, John? Are you okay?" she asked. "I don't know, Jen. I'm still so confused. I don't understand what I did to make her hate me so much. Finding her with your John, it destroyed me. It's made me question everything about myself. Was I really that inadequate? I just don't know." My voice cracked as I admitted the depth of my pain. Even getting her fired, destroying her relationships with the kids, her father, and probably all of our mutual friends, it just doesn't feel like enough. I still feel less than a man. Jenny nodded solemnly. "Believe me, John, I know exactly how you feel." She stared at me for a long moment, clearly debating something within herself. Finally, she leaned in, her voice steady and firm. "You know what you need to do to reclaim your manhood, don't you?" Her intensity caught me off guard. "Yes, Jen, I think I do," I replied. "Good," she said with a small, determined smile. "How far are you comfortable with me going?" I asked, watching as a steely glint appeared in her eyes. "As far as you need to go to exorcise those demons, John. You're too good a guy to let this fester and ruin the rest of your life." "Do what you need to do," she said fiercely. "All right. I'll need an alibi," I said, half joking. "You'll have one. Trust me," she replied. And when she shared her plan for the alibi, we both burst out laughing. It felt good to laugh. It was the first time in a while. After the laughter subsided, we talked more seriously. "What about you, Jen? Do you feel the need for revenge on Karen?" I asked. She shook her head. "Good Lord, no. I know how smooth-talking and manipulative my John can be. Your poor wife didn't stand a chance. Honestly, I almost feel sorry for her. We parted as friends, and she promised to talk to Rob about helping me restore an old car I had. He agreed, and for the next 6 weeks, he came over after school to work on the car. As we tinkered, I used every opportunity to share my values and lessons. We grew close, forming a bond that felt like a gift in the middle of all the chaos. Meanwhile, my free time was dedicated to watching Karen and John's routines. With our accounts frozen by the lawyers, neither could afford a place of their own. Karen stayed with one of her few remaining friends, and John did the same. Most evenings, they met up and spent time together before going their separate ways late at night. When I finally saw a clear pattern, I called Jenny one Thursday night. "Tomorrow's the night," I said. She arranged for her kids to stay with her parents, and I drove to her house the next evening. After a quick kiss on the lips and a playful, "Give him one from me," I wheeled an old motorbike out of her backyard and started it a block away. At John's friend's house, I scoped out the area, using an air pistol to shoot out the streetlight near the driveway. Then I waited in the bushes. He broke his routine by arriving in a cab, unsteady on his feet. The reason became clear when I saw his drunken stumble. He'd been drinking. I've never been one for blind violence, and my sense of honor demanded a fight be at least somewhat fair. But fair wasn't exactly the word for what he'd done with my wife. I stepped out in front of him. "Hi, John," I said calmly. He froze, and in the dim light, I saw recognition flicker in his eyes. "Instead of retreating," he sneered. "Well, if it isn't the guy who couldn't keep his woman in check," he muttered. "Bad move." Instantly, my plan for restraint evaporated. The rage surged, and before I knew it, my fist connected with his jaw, knocking him to his hands and knees. The rest was a blur. From what I pieced together later, I kicked him in the ribs and legs, then delivered several well-aimed strikes to more sensitive areas. Eventually, my red haze lifted, and I regained control. I dragged his unconscious form into the middle of the road. Maybe the police would think it was a hit and run. Maybe not. Either way, my message was clear. I rode the motorbike to a nearby shopping center, changed clothes in the shadows, and dumped them in a dumpster along with my gloves. Then I returned to Jenny's house, parking a block away and wheeling the bike back to her yard. Jenny was waiting, her eyes sparkling with amusement. "How'd it go?" she asked, her grin almost Cheshire-like. "It got messy," I admitted, detailing the events. She didn't seem upset. In fact, she looked like she was enjoying every sordid detail. When she had all the information, I excused myself to shower and clean up. As I rinsed my hair, my eyes closed, I felt a cool breeze, followed by the warmth of skin. A pair of arms wrapped around me from behind, and Jenny whispered in my ear, "You did good, John." "I thought you didn't want this," I said, my voice low. "Forget what I want," Jenny replied firmly. "This isn't about me. This is about what you need. You've taken the man down. Now it's time to reclaim yourself by taking his woman." Her words stunned me for a moment, but when she leaned in and kissed me, I felt something unlock inside. I kissed her back, pouring out everything I'd been holding in. I didn't realize how much I needed that until it happened. "When we finally broke apart," she smiled. "Besides, when the police come asking about your alibi, I want it to be as convincing as possible. Now finish up, you big lummox, and get in the bedroom," she added with a playful grin. Who was I to argue with such a request? I woke up in the faint light of dawn as Jenny slipped back into bed, snuggling up beside me. "I'm sorry, Jen. I was so tired last night. I hope I didn't disappoint you," I murmured. "If that was you in second gear, God help me if I ever see third," she teased with a wicked grin. We both laughed softly and drifted back to sleep. When I woke again, the smell of breakfast and coffee greeted me. Jenny handed me a plate and said casually, "Hey, John, some jerk broke the back window of your car last night. I already called the police." She accompanied this revelation with a wink, and I smirked. Sure enough, the police arrived a little while later. My car's license plate had been linked to a reported assault, but thankfully, my alibi held up. Jenny and I were together in a house steeped in evidence of affection, and a nosy neighbor confirmed my car had been parked there the entire night. What she didn't know was that I hadn't been in the spare room as usual. About a week later, I heard from Karen. She called to say she'd be coming by to collect the rest of her belongings. When I informed her they'd been donated to charity, she paused, then insisted on coming over to talk. When her car pulled into the driveway, I watched her from the window. She stood outside on the phone before finally knocking. I opened the door in my dressing gown, deliberately unbothered by her disapproving frown, and invited her in. "Leave your phone and bag on the table," I said, gesturing toward the spare room. "They'll stay here while we talk." Karen's expression shifted, but she complied. She seemed to know I suspected her of attempting to record the conversation. With her tight-fitting outfit, I doubted she could conceal any other devices, so I allowed her to sit across the kitchen table from me. "Just so you know," Karen began, "I've arranged with a friend to call the police if I don't check in within an hour." I nodded. "Smart," I said simply, remaining silent as she continued. "John, I just want to say how sorry I am for how our marriage ended," she started. "Save it, Karen," I interrupted coldly. "I'm not interested in hearing you try to justify what you did to appease your own guilty conscience." Her face fell. She looked as though she didn't recognize the man sitting before her. After a beat, she asked, "John, it was you who beat up John, wasn't it?" "Yes," I replied without hesitation. She looked stunned, clearly expecting me to deny it. "What?" she stammered. "What's so hard to understand, Karen? You asked if I did it." I said yes. "But why?" she pressed. "He didn't do anything to you." I leaned forward, my voice calm but icy. "Karen, has infidelity already rotted your brain? Seeing you with him destroyed me. It emasculated me, shattered my confidence, stripped me of my pride. That's what cheating does, Karen." She looked genuinely shocked, as though she'd never considered the emotional carnage she'd inflicted. I continued, "After that, I realized I had two choices. I could wither into a broken, loveless shell of a man, like your father, or I could fight back. Does it surprise you that I chose to fight?" She didn't respond, her silence confirming my point. "Yes, I destroyed your boyfriend," I said, my voice low and firm. "And if I need to, I'll do it again. You and him forced this showdown, Karen, and there can only be one survivor. To stop you from destroying me, I had to destroy you both." The weight of my words settled heavily in the room. Karen's face was pale. "I came here hoping you were done with me after getting me fired and turning everyone against me," she said weakly. "John and I just fell in love. You remember what that feels like, don't you?" "Yes, Karen," I replied, my voice heavy with sarcasm. "I remember love. It feels like being kicked in the gut, spat on, and betrayed. If I just come to you and said, 'John, I've fallen for someone else. I want a divorce,' I would have been heartbroken, but I would have let you go. I might have even fought for you. But no, you chose to declare war on me in the most vicious, cruel way possible. You betrayed everything I believed in and everything I thought you stood for." Karen's voice wavered. "What about now, John? Can you leave us in peace now that you've had your revenge?" "Yes, Karen," I said, leaning back in my chair. "I think I can. Not because you deserve it, but because I can't think of anything else to take from you." "Thank you, John," Karen said, her voice unusually soft. "Don't get too excited, Karen," I replied coldly. "I'm not the one you need to worry about." Her brow furrowed. "What do you mean?" "Oh, I've had my revenge on Johnny Boy. But his wife? She hasn't even started on you yet. If I were you, I'd be watching my back. That woman is one hell of a force to reckon with." Before Karen could respond, a playful, unmistakably female voice called down from the master bedroom. "John, are you coming back to bed? You promised me 6 more a day, and you're under budget." Karen's eyes widened in shock. "Who was that?" she asked, her voice shaky. "Jenny," I said simply. Her reaction was instant. She bolted out of the house, shouting something about not going to the police, though I hardly cared enough to listen. As for me, I climbed the stairs to find Jenny waiting for me, fully clothed. She pulled me into a tight hug as I trembled, the adrenaline leaving my system. Karen vanished after that, retreating to some far-off corner of the world. I never tried to find her or contact her again. Like I said, my name's John, and let me tell you, I feel great. I've read somewhere that revenge can feel hollow, but to me, it was the best cure for depression I've ever found. Sure, some might say it's petty or negative to dwell on the past, but forget that. It's time to focus on my future. Jenny and I never became a couple. We did, however, help each other relieve our frustrations from time to time. There wasn't the spark needed for something deeper, but we became good friends and always had each other's backs. Under our combined guidance, Rob and Susan grew into remarkable young adults. I made sure to stay out of Jenny's bed whenever she had a potential boyfriend around, though I kept a close eye on them. I may have intimidated one or two, but I didn't care. When the last one proposed to her, he actually came to me first to ask for my blessing. He was a good guy, so I gave it gladly. Their wedding was a deeply emotional day. With Jenny's father gone, she asked me to walk her down the aisle. At the reception, she introduced me to an old friend of hers who had flown in for the occasion. That meeting turned into something special. With the baggage of my past finally behind me, I was ready for a normal, healthy relationship. Now, I'm even considering asking Jenny to give me away at my own wedding. Would I have recovered enough to get to this point without the revenge I took on Karen and John? Hell no. From Karen's perspective, hello, my name is Karen, and the past 2 years of my life have been an unrelenting nightmare. Looking back, I can justify some of the choices I made, though not all of them. What I did last week, though, that's going to take a while to explain. When I think about it, my life with John was good, comfortable even, but it had grown stale. The only real joy I had left was my first granddaughter. So when John started paying attention to me as a woman, I felt alive again, like a teenager. He was charming, attentive, and made me feel wanted. Before I knew it, I was swept off my feet. Deep down, I knew our relationship was wrong, but it just felt so good. Things progressed from conversations to dates to kissing, and by the time we crossed that line, guilt was no longer part of the equation. I already knew I loved him, and I believed he loved me. We planned to leave our spouses and start a new life together. A friend of mine, Sharon, had been through a messy divorce and warned me how her ex had taken control of the assets early on, leaving her in a terrible position. That's why John and I decided to quietly secure our finances before making our announcement. I didn't know how his wife would react, but I was certain John wouldn't take it well. He and I had talked often about what constituted cheating, and I knew I was already far over the line. Sharon planted a seed of doubt in my mind when she asked if I'd been intimate with John yet. I'd never been particularly fond of lovemaking, but I wanted to prove to myself that I could still be desirable. I knew John found me attractive. He still nagged me for affection often enough. But the spark I once felt for him was long gone. If only I'd felt for John what I felt for John, maybe none of this would have happened. My first time with John wasn't just about testing our physical compatibility. It was a bonding exercise. I wanted to solidify our connection so he wouldn't back out of our plans. Even then, I suspected he wasn't as strong as he seemed. I know what you're thinking. Did I ever stop to consider the possibility of being caught? Did I think about what this would do to John, my father, or my children? The simple answer is no. I didn't expect to get caught. And if I did, well, I had no idea the storm that would follow. I never expected John's nuclear response. As for the rest, honestly, I didn't think about it. I didn't compare myself to my mother, either. She left when I was so young that she wasn't a factor in my decisions. After everything, though, I can't deny the cost of my actions. I wish I could say my love with John was transformative, but it wasn't. It wasn't even particularly good. I found myself faking enjoyment, just as I used to with John. Men and their fragile egos. I ask you. To this day, I have no idea how John discovered my infidelity. It doesn't really matter. What I do know is that the look of utter devastation on his face when he caught us is something I'll never forget. I tried to justify my actions to myself later, but of course, I couldn't. John hadn't done anything remotely deserving of such betrayal. At first, my guilt disguised itself as defiance, but that didn't last long. The thought of my father seeing my shame and the pain in my daughter's voice killed me. The look in John's daughter's eyes was almost as bad. Still, I had no idea my husband was capable of such cruelty until John was hospitalized. When the hospital called to inform me about John's injuries, I knew instinctively that John was responsible. The doctors told me the injuries, broken jaw, concussion, bruised kidneys, 3 broken ribs, a cracked tibia, and a shattered groin, were consistent with a hit-and-run accident. But I knew better. That's why I called the police and gave them John's name and license plate. When I called back 2 days later, they informed me that he was no longer a suspect. Apparently, his alibi was airtight. I was furious and terrified. I stayed by John's side for the week he was in the hospital, convinced that John's wrath wasn't over. 8 weeks earlier, I would have sworn my husband wasn't capable of such violence. Now, I knew better. I had glimpsed a side of him that scared me, a monster of my own creation. When John was about to be discharged, I called John and asked to meet at our old house. This had to stop. Surely, he'd exacted enough revenge. We were both broken. What more did he want? Walking up to the front door was surreal. How had it come to this? How had I gone from loving this man to seeing him as my enemy in such a short time? Before ringing the bell, I called Sharon and told her to call the police if she didn't hear from me within an hour. John opened the door in his dressing gown, his face a blank slate. He silently gestured for me to come inside and asked me to leave my phone and handbag in another room. I kicked myself for not thinking to bring a recorder. Then again, I wasn't sure why I even bothered. It wasn't like John would admit to the assault. I sat across from him at the kitchen table, staring at the stranger who had been my husband for over 27 years. I tried to explain how I'd fallen for John, hoping to ease John's pain and maybe get him to back off. But he shut me down immediately. His tone was harsh, his face emotionless. Who was this man? When he openly admitted to attacking John, I was stunned. I had expected denial, but his brutal honesty floored me. When he explained why he'd done it, I couldn't even argue. His reasoning was cold and precise, and it struck a chord deep within me. For the first time, I truly understood the depth of the hurt I'd caused. John made it clear why he hated John. He didn't sugarcoat anything. It forced me to confront just how self-centered I'd become. My actions had blinded me, allowing me to rationalize the completely unacceptable. I realized then that John's revenge wasn't over, and judging by his expression, it wouldn't be for a long time. When I asked if he remembered what love felt like, it was part of a prepared speech. His answer, though, cut like a knife. Of course, he remembered. How could he not? Love doesn't just vanish. It twists into something unrecognizable when betrayed. I asked him if he planned more revenge, mostly to gauge how far he would go. His answer chilled me. For the first time, I considered John's wife as a threat. What would I have done if someone had done to me what I'd done to her? The thought left me cold. When I realized she was upstairs, I panicked. I ran. I picked John up from the hospital, and we both disappeared. The divorces were finalized quietly, with the paperwork delivered to a P.O. box in another town. Living in hiding, with no friends and constant fear, was unbearable. Money was tight. The only work we could find was commission-based real estate, and the gaps between paychecks stretched endlessly. John and I got married 6 months later. In hindsight, it was a mistake. We were two castaways clinging to each other out of necessity. Marrying him felt like a desperate attempt to justify the pain we'd caused, to others and to ourselves. But John never fully recovered from his injuries. His remaining testicle didn't function, and without expensive testosterone treatment, something we couldn't afford, he became moody, insecure, and jealous. Our relationship deteriorated. What had started as a whirlwind romance crumbled under the weight of its own broken foundation. Let's face it, a marriage built on infidelity is destined to be an uphill battle. From the start, John's constant irritability and insecurities made things difficult, and I found myself becoming just as unfriendly. A friend of mine suggested hormone replacement therapy, HRT, claiming it had worked wonders for her in a similar situation. I was hesitant because of the cost, but she assured me that it was far more affordable than the testosterone treatments John would have needed. One visit to the doctor later, and it was like a miracle. My life began to feel normal again. Happy, even. The doctor warned me, with a smirk, that one of the side effects of estrogen tablets was a resurgence of libido. He said it like it was good news, but when the wife of a man with erectile dysfunction experiences that, it can be anything but. The changes hit me hard. I found myself more excited than I'd been in decades, more so than I'd been even 5 years into my marriage to John. So, when a younger man at my new job started showing interest in me, I couldn't help but respond. His attention was flattering, intoxicating even, but hiding our budding relationship was stressful, especially since John was much more jealous and suspicious than John had ever been. The first time the younger man kissed me, I felt a jolt, not from excitement, but from the overwhelming déjà vu. It was all too familiar. I had walked this road before, and I knew exactly where it led. I refused to go down that path again. I wouldn't cheat. After days of agonizing over it, I thought I'd found a solution. It wasn't ideal, but surely John would have to understand my needs, wouldn't he? So, last Thursday night, I sat him down and, as gently as I could, told him I wouldn't be coming home Friday night. I needed to take a lover. I promised to be discreet. It would only be about intimacy, and I would never rub his face in it. John didn't say a word that night or the following morning. I took his silence as reluctant agreement. That Friday, my new lover took me out for dinner, followed by a rather underwhelming encounter that left me more embarrassed than satisfied. Afterward, I returned to the trailer John and I shared, only to find it empty. As dawn broke, the sound of sirens shattered the silence, and I learned the horrible truth. John was gone. They found him hanging from a tree. I had done it again. I had destroyed another man. Bracing myself for the inevitable fallout, I was surprised to find it wasn't as explosive as I expected. John's revenge was quiet, just a suicide note and a letter to his attorney. The suicide note, however, was emailed to all our friends. Overnight, I became a pariah, abandoned faster than an airplane dumps its sewage. The letter to his attorney? That was to change the beneficiaries of his life insurance policy and his will. Everything went to his children. I was left with nothing. When will I ever learn? Never mess with a man's pride. Subscribe so you don't miss new stories on the channel. Bye.